Welcome to the party. I'm Sam Ekstrom of Locked On Sports Minnesota. The Minnesota Vikings' path to respectability on defense. We give you that today.
Locked On Sports Minnesota podcast. It's endless Minnesota Vikings talk with the diverse voices of your local experts. It's time for the Minnesota Football Party. It's your guys hanging out talking next level Vikings football. So join in with Pro Football Network's Arif Hasan, Locked On Vikings Luke Braun, Superior Sports Talk's Luke Inman, and Vikings insider Sam Ekstrom, plus the biggest names in Minnesota football for the Minnesota Football Party. And it starts now.
Happy Monday. Hope everybody had a great weekend. It's another week, and it's the Minnesota Football Party with Arif Hasan and Luke Braun. My name's Sam Ekstrom, covering the Vikings here at Locked On Sports Minnesota. Find me on Twitter at Sam Ekstrom, Arif on Twitter at Arif Hasan NFL, Luke Braun on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. Today's show brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook partner of Locked On. Make every moment more at FanDuel.com/Locked On. Get started today. Coming up on today's show, Minnesota Vikings defensive respectability. How can they attain it? What is the path to the Vikings not being a bottom three defense like they've been the last 3 years? We discussed that, and KJ Osborn's chances to be a legit wide receiver too, and not just the guy that we enjoy because he's a cool guy and because he was a 5th-round pick. How is he a legit wide receiver too next season? I think we also bring back Nerdy Stat of the Day. That's definitely going to happen, and I've got a pie chart on how to divvy up the carries in the running back rotation. So no shortage of topics on today's Minnesota Football Party, which is available free and available wherever you get your podcasts. We're also free to subscribe to on YouTube. Just find Locked On Sports Minnesota. Luke Braun, good morning. Arif, good morning. Are you ready to tackle the heavy topics right out of the gate, or do we need more small talk?
I mean, this sounds pretty serious. I think we should get to it. I mean, this is like really deep, heavy off-season stuff.
Arif knows my heart.
People really are. People want to hear this. Yeah, we're doing great.
The Minnesota Vikings defense has been poor through multiple defensive coordinators, some new personnel. It has been poor for 3 seasons and projects to be poor again. What is the Vikings' defensive path to respectability in 2023? Let's lay out the blueprint, kind of bullet point by bullet point. How does Minnesota pull this off with a depleted secondary, depleted linebackers, and currently a murky, that's my word of the offseason, a murky defensive line situation? Arif, we'll start with you.
I mean, I think a lot of it just has to do with, coaching, right? Like the path to respectability is like essentially trusting that Brian Flores knows what he's doing, right? Which I think that most of us do. It's going to be, figuring out, the correct rotation for that defensive line. Like, as you mentioned, it's murky. One of the reasons it's murky is because, we don't really know what to do with all the edge rushers, right? And kind of figuring out what to do with all those players, making sure that they all get, enough snaps, maybe at least 800 each or something like that, and have them play kind of across the line whenever appropriate. That's a big part of it. But also, I think, the biggest part of it is making sure that, secondary coheres, right? Because if we're, truly evaluating what the Brian Flores defense has done over the past couple of years in Miami and New England, we know that there's a heavy amount of man coverage, whether that's off and press. I think that Luke mentioned that it's off coverage a little bit more often, but that there is a significant amount of, player freedom, a lot of blitzing, a lot of, movement around, a lot of, taking advantage of like unique player skill sets to send them, into places that they're a little bit more comfortable with which I think that you need to maximize, because a lot of these players can be one-dimensional in some ways or limited in some ways, right? Like I think that there's a way, for example, that Brian Asamoah, could be misused and is not an appropriate linebacker for a lot of situations. And there's a lot of areas where his skill set really shines. And so you need to find ways to kind of maximize what he does. And I think the path to respectability involves, accounting for players like that, accounting for, what is it that Byron Murphy does well? What is it that he does poorly? What is it that he, what is it that, Mekhi Blackmon does well? What does he do poorly? Finding ways to isolate the stuff that they do well, and fitting within kind of the overall, cohesiveness of the defense. So the path to the defense is Brian Flores is good at what he does, which, we expect that to be the case.
Brian Flores masterminding a defense is probably bullet point 1. Everything else is a sub bullet point beneath that. Luke, Braun, your thoughts?
I think it's pretty simple. They got to get more out of their corners. The corner room is more or less what it's going to be at this point. We mostly know the shape of it. Maybe they add another guy. But we mostly know the shape of, we've got Byron Murphy, probably some competition between Booth and Caleb Evans and Mekhi Blackmon and whoever else. We need to get more out of those guys than I think we would most fans are expecting to get. Like Arif said, it's a lot of one-on-one coverage, a lot of man coverage. There is plenty of press. There's a lot of off when they blitz. They have to play off coverage when they blitz, which puts a lot of stress on off-man coverage. Can those guys do it? That's kind of going to be what this comes down to. Brian Flores loves to rush 5, loves to live in these kind of blitzing worlds. It gives you something of a floor in a weird way, just because, all right, that's good. It's going to just like disrupt enough plays where it can maybe figure out somebody's protections and you can kind of steal a game that way. But if you can't cover on the back end, those blitzes get exposed a lot. So I think their path to respectability is honestly getting more out of Booth and Evans than they expect, or than we expect, because the Vikings have been talking these guys up all off season. I think that needs to bear out. If those guys can cover, then this thing can work out really well. But if they can't, it gets exposed. I think it's all about getting more out of the corners. And if you can't get more out of the corners, then I think the path to respectability is wait another year.
It's tough. That's what it is.
Let's go in our time machine here. Let's go back to 2012. That was a group sorely in need of a defensive turnaround. They kind of aged out on defense. They were 31st in points allowed in 2011. 2012 was an enigma. They were 14th. What did that group do well? How did they turn it around with seemingly nothing going for them on paper? And I shouldn't say that. They did have some good pieces.
Jared Allen, right?
Jared Allen, yes. But my suggestion is that what if you just get really good at stopping the run? Like really good at stopping the run. Is that not more realistic than assuming the secondary just gets it together? And that's going to be frustrating. Let's just assume that's going to be frustrating. But what if you're really good at stopping the run? I think you have more pieces in place to do that. I think there's probably a little more randomness involved in just being a good run stuffing team working as a unit than assuming that these guys that are on islands are going to be good at pass defense. So if you are a top 8 run defense, does that not make it so much easier then for those guys in the secondary in some favorable situations for the defense? Potentially. What do you guys think about that?
So if the choice is between,
but I don't know how you're going to approach that.
Well, I mean, you can like change
like
the box count and play your nose a little bit more often. But to me, if the choice is between improving your run defense dramatically and improving your pass defense marginally, maybe by playing your nose tackle more often, maybe by playing, the higher box count a little bit more, maybe, blitzing a little bit less in areas where it opens up run lanes, making sure that, the way the defense is oriented on first and second down is primarily to stop the run. If the choice is between to improve the run defense dramatically and the pass defense marginally, I would still take the pass defense. I would still think that, finding ways to make sure that the corners are maximized as opposed to putting them in situations where they're going to be a little bit better off, like on third down. I would rather, right, that you don't get exploited for like a 50-yard pass on first down, right? I would rather that you improve the pass defense marginally because the relationship that it has to winning games is a little bit larger, even though that these things, like you pointed out, Sam, are related, right? Like the better you are at run defense, the more likely you are to be able to force, second and long and then third and long. And then third and long is, a passing down, and you've got a lot more tools available to you to help stop the pass, and you get a little bit better at it, right? I mean, like, sack rates double, pressure rate doubles on third down, right? So it's not as if that this relationship doesn't exist, but I would say that you're giving up essentially conversions on first and second down through the air that way, and that's going to hurt you more in the long run. So I would say that I would rather take the risk and improve your pass defense marginally than improve the run defense dramatically, which is the gamble the Vikings hoped to take last year. But the problem is in making the run defense worse with the way that scheme was oriented, they did not improve their pass defense, which that is just worse. You can't just do that. So
they just broke stuff. It didn't fix anything.
Yeah, you just kept breaking. I would argue
Classic
that
Ryan Poles.
the worst of all worlds, and don't do that. But if that's the choice, I'd improve the pass defense marginally.
But Braun, do you think that without devoting extra resources to making the run defense better, that could it happen schematically? Because, and I'm not saying that they're going to have great tackling from Asamoah even or Hicks, but their edge rushers, the ones that at least are on the roster now, know how to tackle. I think it comes down to kind of that interior line, how they can fare. And I know there's not a lot of big names in that group, and you lose Dalvin Tomlinson. So there's nothing to suggest the run defense will be better. But do you think that the Flores effect could lead to that?
I'm not great at Flores' run defense yet. So that's hard to answer. But I will say
it's
schematic.
Weird. He's been weird about it.
Is it?
Yeah,
it's
weird.
I genuinely just have not gotten to look into it yet.
The fronts are weird.
Give us more. Say more words about that, Arif. That sounds interesting.
Okay, so I mean, a lot of it's built off of what Belichick has done previously. So, but the thing is, like with different personnel in there, there's different approaches to what those defensive linemen will do. So, for example, this all goes all the way back to like Vince Wilfork, right? When they had Vince Wilfork in there, they would have him 2 gap and everyone else 1 gap, right? And breaking that down without that knowledge is really difficult to do. And so like how the linebackers approach, the gap, like because they would just like leave the A gaps completely uncovered, right? And they were really good at run defense because Vince Wilfork was really good at 2 gapping a center, right? And they would leave all of these other gaps open essentially for linebackers, and so they would steal a gap back by having 1-2 gap there, right? I mean, Seattle did this for a little bit with their 4 techniques 2 gapping in 2011 and 2012, but Brian Flores has experimented with this a little bit, and when he's had nose tackles like Christian Wilkins, right, it's been a possibility to change what each individual defensive lineman is doing based off of the front. In fact, even there's a moment where the Belichick defense would have one side be 1 gapping and the other side be 2 gapping. That's crazy, right? And so to kind of break down that run defense, it's a little bit difficult without knowing that is on the table. And it really screws up with the way offensive linemen kind of block, right? And the way they get up to their protections and stuff like that. So, or the way they get up to the run fits and stuff like that. So it can be kind of tough to break down. I think that approach is going to be really good for someone like Asamoah, who freelances a little bit, kind of likes to shoot gaps as often as possible. And so if you just like give him runways and have everyone else just kind of figure it out, you might end up with a really high level performance from somebody who does not have a complete skill set yet as a linebacker. So it can be pretty weird to figure out what Flores is doing from a run defense standpoint.
Yeah, that all sounds really cool. I think the only thing I want to say is like solving a problem schematically is in a way spending a resource. Like schematic resources are resources. Just because you aren't like spending cap space or a draft pick on a different player, but then you have to make up for that player. Like the most obvious example I can think of is like chipping for a tackle that's struggling. You can cheap out on tackle, but then if that means you have to spend a player every snap chipping or double teaming with that guy, like that's just a cost manifesting in a different way. But when it comes to the run defense, yeah, if that stuff can all work out, I don't know. Do we have somebody that like does Harrison Phillips 2 gap that well? And I know that there's other ways, other forms that this can take. That we don't have to like say this is the Vince Wilfork, this is this guy, this is that guy. But Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm in general, if you can improve the run defense, that's great. That helps, but it doesn't really make me that much less worried about the corners because eventually teams will pass on them.
Yeah, and I agree with that. You're going to have your AJ Jefferson moments with Andrew Booth Jr. and a Caleb Evans. What do you think of that poll? Huh? That's a 2012 reference. So let me just reverse ask the question. Were the Vikings resource poor in the run game last year, whether that be schematics or personnel? Because obviously with Mike Zimmer, they were not personnel poor. They had Michael Pierce. They had Dalvin Tomlinson. They had Everson Griffin for a year. They had Danielle Hunter. And like in 2020 and 2021 were horrible. With Ed Donatell's scheme, did you sense that were they actually trying to take from the run defense to bolster the pass defense? Was that a sense that you guys got?
100%.
Yeah. The way that manifests is that they would take a guy out of the box. They would like never have a safety. You'd never have Harrison Smith on the line of scrimmage, and we all complained about that all year. That's
right.
Kind of the way that manifests, where you go, we're not gonna use you in the run. If we give up more run, that's fine. But we also have Harrison Phillips and Dalvin Tomlinson up front. And we're gonna hope that having two high safeties all the time helps us a lot in the pass. But because of other stuff, that didn't really manifest. It did not help in the pass, and they had all kinds of problems in the pass. They actually had like the same two problems in the pass every single game for everybody. That was really easy for everyone to exploit because it was always the same. And that was frustrating enough, I guess, for that whole plan to get thrown into the trash.
Yeah. You'd always keep a safety out of the box. You'd you would always be -1 in the box. And by that, I mean that there was always one more blocker than there was a defender. So it wasn't just taking a safety out of the box. That was part of it. But also, they would keep the linebackers out wider, right? So that they had the ability to shut down like running back flares and, slot defenders entering their zones and stuff like that. And so you would not have your linebackers lined up over A gaps and stuff like that. And you'd be kind of relying on, the Rams call it gap and a half, right? You'd be relying on your defensive tackles to have their own gap, but also peek into the gap behind them and then maybe try to block shed to do that. And the thing is that works like really well when it's like Aaron Donald and Michael Brockers. And though I think Dalvin Tomlinson and Harrison Phillips are really excellent defensive tackles, they are not Aaron Donald and Michael Brockers, right? And so it is really difficult to ask someone to occupy a gap and then if the run flows in the opposite way, rip all the way across a player's face to get into the other gap in time to get to that running back. That is just a hellacious ask. So, I think that a lot of the way it was set up was designed almost specifically to, induce the run, not even just like be poor at defending the run in order to help make them run the ball because it's less efficient. And then
kind of the
they'll
Buccaneers
check into it or they'll kill it. There are RPOs that are based on like box count or based on like, is there like, what does this guy do? And trying to bait out those runs was also part of it.
So they would invite runs specifically. Yeah. Which that is a philosophy I don't have an issue with. You just have to, if you're going to do that, when they do throw the ball, you got to stop it. You got to you got to live up to the other end of the bargain, which is to be good at defending the pass. So I have no issue with inviting the run so that they run more often, but you got to be somewhat decent at stopping the run. And then, you got to make sure that you stop the pass.
And I think it all comes back to Luke Braun's original point. You got to get more from the cornerbacks. And I would even venture to say this. It's 2023. We are a decade removed from the last time the Vikings hit on a cornerback draft pick, Xavier Rhodes. I don't think Trey Waynes is a hit. I don't think Mackenzie Alexander is a hit. I think they were slightly below expectation for where they were drafted. I think it's been a long time. It's been way too long for what's been devoted to that position in draft capital. Agreed? Disagreed?
It's a little harsh on some of those guys, and I also think it's perfectly appropriate to pick a corner in the top 70, we'll say, every other year. I think if you don't do that, it starts to deteriorate really fast on you.
Yeah. I mean,
or you're not doing that because you have guys you're extending that are on your team for 10 years and you just don't need to.
Yeah, I would argue, like, Mac wasn't a hit, Trey Waynes wasn't a hit, and they need to be continuously aggressive about quarterbacks. I just the thing that frustrated a lot of Vikings fans was like how often it happened in the first round, and then how often it turned into somebody that, like a Mike Hughes, right? It just turned into somebody that was
Mike
not
Hughes
helpful. So like,
Mhm.
yeah, and you don't want to like badmouth Jeff Gladney because he's passed away, but I mean, when he was with the Vikings, he was not very productive.
Yeah, it's
So
okay to be, I think, frustrated that the first round pick did not return good value. I don't think that's like reflecting on Jeff Gladney. It's not blaming him for being dead.
yeah, right, exactly. So, yeah, I mean those picks, I think it's fair to say that they weren't hits, but you need to keep swinging the bat because cornerback contracts are
Yeah.
difficult to absorb. Like especially like the Eagles just kind of discovered this, right? Extending two high level cornerbacks is really tough, and so continuously having a group of cornerbacks is like critical.
The
Yeah,
Eagles
and I
cap
think that-
maneuvering is so funny.
It is
Like
a
what
lot.
they have done to facilitate this is dark and evil.
Are they super overextended again, like they were 3 years ago?
I think
I wonder if
they're
it's as bad
whatever
as it was
what
3
they're
years ago.
doing is very weird. Like they go crazy with void years. They go crazy with weird contract structures. Like Jalen Hurts' contract structure is super unique. And I think it's in a way extending further than like what the Saints do, where they just like promise a bunch of salary and restructure it. The Eagles are like they do spend their flexibility quite a bit, but they also did just like they've come out of some of the harshest cap situations in football, and they're like extending quarterbacks to record-setting deals and stuff. So
Yeah,
it's like
I mean,
they're finding a way. They've got a super team right now.
yeah, they had 7 players on their defense scheduled to hit free agency this offseason, and they kept most of them, which is wild considering that they were already negative in the cap before those extensions. So their ability to kind of figure that out is prodigious.
I think other teams are should and are going to start copying that stuff a little bit.
Yeah. We'll see.
I'm going to tell y'all about FanDuel, and then I'm going to do something I've never done before, and that is provide a negative argument about KJ Osborn. This will be a first for me.
Oh my gosh.
We'll see if I can muster the cojones to get it done. But first, today's show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs, because right now, new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. In addition, they have great promotions at FanDuel. I recently saw a Bet 5 Get 150 promotion that's running on FanDuel. Make sure you could check that out on the safe and secure FanDuel Sportsbook app, and you get paid instantly when you win. No better place to bet the playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. NBA playoffs, NHL playoffs, headed very soon for their conference finals. FanDuel.com/locked-on. Get that no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. FanDuel.com/locked-on. It's FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, guys, we've touched on KJ Osborn in previous weeks, and we've talked about Jordan Addison's role. Will he be a wide receiver 2, a wide receiver 3, and what does this mean for KJ Osborn? I want to know from you guys if you think that Osborn can be a legit wide receiver 2. And I think we went into seasons, whether it was with Thielen and Jefferson, with Thielen and Diggs, we believed that Thielen was a 1,000-yard guy. Like we thought any given year, Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs, or Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson, could both be 1,000-yard receivers. Can KJ Osborn provide the same belief? I love KJ Osborn. I'm the founding member of the KJ Osborn fan club. Anyone who says otherwise is wrong. So that being said, there were 102 qualified receivers last year on PFF. KJ Osborn got a pretty good size snap count. He was bottom 20 in yards per route run, which is an efficiency stat that's not based on volume. Bottom 30 in contested catch percentage. Bottom 20 in average depth of target. Now, some of these factors kind of revolve around like Justin Jefferson getting a big target share. That might be really a big factor in that. But do you think that KJ Osborn can sort of improve on some of these underlying metrics and become the wide receiver 2 that we want him to be?
Yeah, sure. I don't really care about catch percentage all that much. Having that combined with a low depth of target does present potentially some concerns, but also, Cousins was not performing like he typically does, right? He was performing, below his level of play, and catch percentage is basically just a version of completion percentage, and that's more controlled by the quarterback than it is by the receiver. And it also kind of doesn't matter. I would say that stuff like low depth of target, stuff like low catch percentage, all of that is
contested catch percentage. Let me clarify that.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, that's super random then. Yeah, that's they're very slow, very low sample type stuff. It's very difficult to repeat that from year to year. Tends to rebound. It's when you have an issue with a receiver's contested catch capability, you're talking kind of long view type stuff. So that doesn't bother me that much. A lot of it I thought was kind of out of Osborn's control, in the same way that I thought Thielen wasn't playing all that poorly, despite not getting as many yards as we expected. I think Osborn was playing pretty well without getting the yards that we expected. I thought that he did a pretty good job of getting open. I thought he did a pretty good job of reeling the ball in when it was thrown within his area. I thought that he did a pretty good job of finding space. Now there were issues, right? I think that his timing wasn't always there like it was for Thielen and Jefferson. I think that there was issues in terms of making sure that his route depths were accurate, making sure that he hits the right options. But, for the most part, I thought that he played very well. And so I think that opportunity is always going to be available for him, that he's always going to have, the possibility of being a wide receiver 2 in theory. Now, I don't think that he's going to beat out Jordan Addison, right? But I think that in theory, Osborn is the quality of receiver where you can kind of, in most offenses, in most situations, get 1,000 yards out of him. So it's those are areas where you kind of want to have some questions answered, but it really doesn't bother me all that much. I think that he's very talented.
Yeah, and he actually had a slightly better season in 2021 than 2022. A little more efficient, had an additional touchdown. Yards per route run was better. Contested catch percentage was better. And that was with, obviously, a very good Thielen and Jefferson on the field as well. And last year, an adjustment for everybody moving into a new scheme. Braun, your thoughts, Osborn?
Yeah, if you're going to say, will he be wide receiver 2, as in, will he be the second most used wide receiver? I mean, that's just going to come down to a camp competition, right? And kind of competition throughout the year. So to answer that question, you kind of just have to predict who wins the camp battle, because I don't think that there's any, you're not going in with the intention of one guy being 2 and one guy. No, you're going to let them duke it out, and we'll see what happens. I guess, yeah, if I'm going to predict the battle between Osborn and Addison, I guess I'll go with Addison, but we'll see what happens in camp. To the 1,000-yard receiver mark, I think that's really interesting. For that scenario to happen, you need to see the offense kind of spread the ball around a little bit more than, and not go 100% through Jefferson, which I don't know if they're going to do. I don't know if they should do. And then you need that second guy. And you also need KJ Osborn to be the guy that kind of is the go-to guy for that. So I don't see that happening. I don't know if that is even really that negative of a thing on KJ Osborn. If we say, I don't think he gets 1,000 yards, that's a lot to ask for a guy that's kind of competing for a second role, even if he does win that job. Unless Jordan Addison is full on Laquan Treadwell disappearing act, he's gonna eat into some of that market share, right? Mm-hmm. So it'll hopefully, if all goes well, we have 3 viable starting wide receivers plus whatever we get out of Jalen Naylor, and we can kind of go forward from there. With Osborn, I don't know. I think it's just because he wears 17. It gets in my head. There's just such a clutch wide receiver 3 third down vibe that he just gives me so many Jarius Wright memories.
For Jarius Wright,
yeah. It's specifically Jarius Wright. It just makes me think.
And then Kendall Wright for a minute.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Did he for one camp? Yeah. He didn't even make the team.
One
right?
camp didn't make the team. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. And there's no shame in that role, I guess. That's awesome. he can be that. And if Jordan Addison is too, that's great. If it turns out to be kind of a different way around and Addison, I don't know, needs time to bulk up or something like that, then okay, we'll go with that. But whatever it is, he'll have his place in this offense and we can be all right with that.
Yeah, realistically, it's probably more of an aggregate situation between Addison and Osborn. Like if the two of them are contributing 1,500 to 1,700 yards combined, you're loving that. You're loving that season because that goes with the 1,800 yards that Jefferson has. And suddenly you've got close to 3,500 yards passing. And then you've got Hawkinson. Might have set those numbers a little loftily. But I was talking about this with Ron Johnson, too. It is a little tougher, I think, for a rookie to come in and kind of unseat a veteran in today's lighter load climate because the Vikings go super easy in OTAs. They don't push training camp like the Mike Zimmer era. And I don't even know if Addison's going to play in the preseason. I don't think he will. So it is going to be difficult for Addison to surge his way past KJ Osborn. Like they might like what they're seeing in terms of his, okay, this guy, he's running great routes. We knew that. Is he understanding the playbook? That might be the biggest hurdle for him, honestly. But I don't know if he's going to just take the wide receiver 2 job by the collar and win it away from KJ Osborn. I think that they'll have a little bit of timeshare in there. They'll be on the field together in 3 wide receiver sets. But I think it might require Osborn to actually struggle for Addison to really see his elevation in the offense. Arif, your thoughts?
I don't know about that. I was just looking at Cooper Kupp with the Rams. His rookie year, he was a 3rd-round pick, right? So he's not even going to get the same kind of consideration that that like a 1st-round pick like Jordan Addison would have. What was that, like 2017? And he got like 870 yards. He only technically started like 5 games, but he got onto the field so often. And this is a team that had investments in players like Robert Woods and Sammy Watkins, and to some extent, Tavon Austin. And you take a look, he's got 869 yards. He had 94 targets. I think that even though they're in a situation where they have a pretty light camp, I mean, the reason the Vikings do that, it's related to the fact that the Rams have done it for so long, so successfully. Even though they had a light camp, even though that, you don't tend to see all that much from, the players that you want in the preseason, Cooper Kupp was able to get his way onto the field pretty quickly. And so I think that they'll have, methods of trying to determine whether or not they want to rotate players in pretty quickly. And my feeling from this organization, now it didn't play out last year, but my feeling from this organization is that they're not going to try and restrict rookies. I think the reason that rookies didn't see the field last year is because they weren't good, right? I think that when you have good rookies, it's going to change things. And maybe I'm wrong about that, but like based off of kind of what the Rams have done historically, if a rookie has the ability to contribute, whether it's from the 1st round or the 5th round, not that we have a ton of Rams 1st rounders to track, but whether it's from the 1st round or 5th round, they see the field pretty quickly, despite the fact that they don't have many reps or get to demonstrate, who they are in a more realistic sense in camp.
Yeah, there's definitely like a ready to play factor. Like Brian Asamoah did get in, but not till he was ready. Caleb Evans kind of went in as a part of necessity, and he went in over Booth, which I think also kind of tells you there's a little bit more meritocracy to this. But with Addison too, and with like wide receiver battles, yeah, you're battling over market share more than like, 1st string, 2nd string, 3rd string, like you kind of are. Like on offensive line, there's a winner, he's a starter, there's a loser, he's a backup. On the wide receivers, it's more fluid, I guess. And so it'll be kind of hard to really determine, all right, who really is the winner of the battle? Does it even change over time? Maybe you start out and KJ Osborn's getting a little bit more while Jordan Addison's still acclimating, but then by week 6, it's changed. Like that kind of thing can happen too. And yeah, I get what Ron's talking about there with like, you're not practicing as hard, you're not practicing as much as you used to. It's going to be harder for guys to kind of get used to the flow of things just because there's less time. But that I don't think that doesn't like preclude Jordan Addison from just showing up and balling out, right? Like if he's just like really good, yeah, they'll put him in. That doesn't mean KJ Osborn gets banished to the bench and we never see him. But I think this is almost like a fantasy question. Like what you're not drafting KJ Osborn in the 4th round of your fantasy draft, assuming you're going to get a 1,000-yard receiver.
Right.
Yeah. I've got a nerdy stat of the day where I compare Jaren Hall to Russell Wilson. But first, Locked On is proud to partner with SiriusXM. You can now find Locked On Sports Minnesota shows on the SiriusXM app. The Ron Johnson Show, Minnesota Football Party, Minnesota Sports Rankum. Download the SXM app and search Locked On Sports Minnesota.
Analytics fans rejoice.
Woo-hoo-hoo!
It's time to get educated.
Whoa, you're blowing my mind right now.
With the nerdy stat of the day.
Oh, yes, it returns the nerdy stat of the day. I'm going to start because I like mine. Jaren Hall is on the shorter side. He's 6 feet tall. Is that going to be a problem? Well, I broke down his batted passes per attempt, or rather, in how many attempts is he having a pass batted in his career? So I looked up other short quarterbacks for reference. Kyler Murray, 41 bats in 2004 NFL pass attempts. That's 1 in 49. Zach Wilson, 16 batted pass attempts in 624 NFL attempts. That's 1 in 39. Russell Wilson, 81 bats, 5,670 attempts. That's 1 in 70. So for reference, Zach Wilson, 1 in 39. Kyler Murray, 1 in 49. Russell Wilson, 1 in 70. Where does Jaren Hall fit into this mix? Well, in college, Jaren Hall had 11 passes batted in 718 attempts. That is 1 in 65. So clearly, Jaren Hall is much closer to Russell Wilson than he is to Kyler Murray or Zach Wilson. I rest my case.
Yeah, no, that's a pretty strong case.
Pretty strong correlation. Now, if I was a real researcher, I would have gone back to Murray and Wilson's college bats and see how they translated to the NFL. That'll be next week on Sam's Nerdy Stat of the Day.
I bet.
There's a skill to that I think you can see on tape with Jaren Hall and like readjusting his launch points so that he can get a good throwing lane. Like he can do that, and some quarterback like Kirk Cousins just doesn't do that because he's tall. He never really had to, but that does lead to some batted passes sometimes. But yeah, you can see him like kind of tinkering with his launch point a little bit. A lot of QBs can do that, and I think it's a repeatable skill when you have that.
I mean, I think a lot of it's because he's rolling out of the pocket. So like.
Well, yeah, there's a ton of play action and stuff that affects that. Yeah. It was a McVay offense, which luckily,
good news.
Pro style though, right? I mean, you've got no qualms about the BYU offense.
It is very McVay.
Yeah, I've got.
I mean,
about
like
it,
play action helps a little bit.
Yeah,
but
it's more like when your like offensive linemen are all 26 years old, it kind of helps. But so I've got 2 nerdy stats of the day because I felt like my first nerdy stat wasn't nerdy enough, and I'm pretty confident I won't be stealing from Luke. The first one is just because I'm doing like strength of schedule stuff, and just a reminder not to use win percentage as a reason to determine strength of schedule. And for that, we're going to go all the way back to the discourse from last year, close game winning percentage. I took a look at how many close games a team won in year end and year end plus 1 over the course of 10 years and what their record was. And so for teams with a winning record in close games, their winning record was on average 760 or something like that, 758. Their year end plus 1 winning percentage in close games was 493, basically 500. It turns out the same thing happens on the other side of the spectrum. That if you've got a losing close game winning percentage, you get up to 507. It's 500. So the close game winning percentage thing is real, especially in the next year. That's something to kind of keep in mind. Second thing.
That was pretty nerdy.
I didn't think it was that nerdy because we kept talking about it last year. It was all we talked about.
Mainstream.
Yeah. So yards per route run, also not that nerdy. Combined, I think these two are pretty nerdy. How many yards you get per route run? Jordan Addison, 2021 is Blitnikoff year. I'm using his best year because I think that that's the fairest thing to do. Plus, it allows me to make a really fun comparison. His yards per out run was 2.94, which in college is pretty high. It's not the number one in the FBS, but you know who it's right next to? Garrett Wilson at 3.00. So, you know, the Ohio State ones are pretty fun. I will say that. The guy who beat Garrett Wilson got drafted by the Seahawks this year. So, you know.
That's awesome.
Oh, Ohio State.
Braun nerded up.
I'm also going in the wide receiver direction. I'm taking one from Arjun Manan. He tweeted this last week. It's gotten a lot of run. You probably heard about it, but he tweeted out a little chart of EPA per play and success rate on things. He was this was about the Lions drafting Jahmyr Gibbs, and about wide receivers lining up in the backfield versus running backs lining up in the slot and stuff. When you target a wide receiver lined up in the backfield, this is the last 4 years of data, the EPA per play is 0.33, which is insane. Success rate of 53%, which is above 50, like that, on just 242 targets. Relatively low sample, not a thing that happens a lot, but a very efficient thing versus if you take a running back and line that running back up in the slot and then target that running back, like use him like a receiver, the EPA per play is negative, minus 0.018. So just basically around zero, but still not all that successful. 45% success rate on over 1,300 targets. An interesting way to look at that because I think you've heard from the Lions the argument of like, oh, we're going to use him like a receiver. If you watch him at Alabama, he wasn't used like on a full route tree like a receiver. He did kind of running back receiving things, which is a much more limited route tree. So it's not that surprising to see that like running backs split out wide, not running a full route tree is not going to be as successful as a wide receiver who can run anything being put in the backfield so that they can get a free release and probably a matchup against a linebacker or a safety. That all tracks, but it's, good to confirm.
I think in terms of EPA per route run, because we hear this basically every year, that X or Y running back is basic. Right. Yeah. But we hear this basically every year. We're like a running back. This running back is basically a receiver. You could just split him out wide and he's basically a receiver, right? There's at least one running back almost every year, maybe two or three. And I'm not going to pretend I'm not guilty of it too. I mean, that's how I hyped up Mike Boone, right? But I mean, in fairness, he was a receiver.
You did nothing wrong.
Yeah.
Don't apologize.
Yeah, look at that. But he's still in the league, right? So I'm right. Houston Texan Mike Boone. The thing is, I think there's only one running back in recent football that has been positive versus their third best receiver in expected points per route run. And that's like Christian McCaffrey. And so if you think your dude is as good a receiver as Christian McCaffrey, you should just say that because that actually gives you a bar to evaluate as opposed to, he's basically a receiver because no one is. There's almost no running back that's really good at catching the ball is basically a wide receiver. It just doesn't happen because if that was true, they would have been a wide receiver because that's pretty valuable. So, Tony Pollard, I think didn't meet the sample threshold, so he might be the other one. But also, he was literally a receiver. So I don't know if that one counts, but that's maybe the closest you can get.
His EPA per play against the Vikings in week 11 was like 9 points per play.
He scored 9 points in every play.
Yeah.
Just give or take.
Yeah.
Give or take. Let's since we're talking running backs, let's conclude with this pie chart. 4 key backs, not including Dalvin Cook. Madison, Nwangwu, Chandler, McBride. How's your pie chart for workload?
Madison gets, 63%. That sounds right? So that gives me, 27 to work with?
It's a big number.
37.
Is this what you want or what you think will happen?
What I think will happen.
Okay.
What
do you want?
37 to work with?
I want to know what you want.
What I want?
What do you want?
Madison 48%. Why am I picking these numbers? They're just harder to work with.
Why can't you just be normal?
Yeah. No, I refuse.
Why not use decimal points?
Yeah.
And then what it gives me like 52% to work with. Let's
Division fast. Hey, that's how many cards there are in a deck of cards.
Yeah, but it's out of 3, not out of 4, right? That's the issue.
Yeah.
17.333333.
Let's do Chandler
and CJ
21,
Ham. There,
right?
now you have a fourth.
Oh yeah, CJ is the 0.1 that you have left over.
So Ty Chandler then gets 21%. That gives me 31% to work with. Let's give CJ Ham 2%. So that gives me 29 to work with. And then Kene Nwangwu, this is touches or carries? I've not been keeping that much track.
Let's say touches.
Okay, great. That gives Kene Nwangwu a little bit more to do. Then I'll give him 17, and that leaves 12 for Dwayne McBride.
All right, Braun, can you match that in terms of?
I'm not going to paint myself in that kind of corner.
We'll
go with
I think I landed that. That worked out beautifully.
Nailed it.
And good for you. I'm not following. Look, what I think will happen is probably going to have a lot more to do with who stays healthy, certain game plan stuff. Probably going to be easier to look at that kind of thing like week to week than like on the season whole. So I'll say what I guess I would want is, I mean, I don't know. I guess Madison's probably getting the most, right? So we'll give him a solid 50%, but I do think it's going to be more of a committee than like a lead back plus his supporting pieces. So I'll give 50% to Madison, and then I'll do like 30%. I guess I'm like believing the coaches when they talk about Ty Chandler a little bit, and I'll say that he gets a lot more than I think maybe we're expecting. They could just be lying to me, and then I'm wrong, and that's fine. But I'll give 25 to Ty Chandler. It leaves me 25 to divvy up between Dwayne McBride and Kene Nwangwu. I think McBride might end up getting more than Nwangwu. For whatever reason, Nwangwu's not like coming through from scrimmage as a running back. He'll have his spot on the team as a kick returner no matter what. But I'll divide that last 25 up. We'll go 15 McBride, 10 Nwangwu. I'm thinking
those
snap
numbers
count
were
there, too.
so boring. Good Lord.
Too many zeros and fives.
I'm not biting off more than I can chew this morning. All right.
Braun thought about this the exact same way I am. I would love to see a rotation that kind of de-emphasizes Madison, to be honest with you. I also believe Chandler is your number 2. And I was the biggest critic in the world of not using Nwangwu during the season. And I still think it was kind of dumb. But I'm also we're 2 coaching staffs into this who have clearly not seen what they need to see from Nwangwu. Maybe it's in a pass protection perspective. Maybe it's a vision perspective, but they don't like him being on the field on offense. So I too think that McBride could outsnap Nwangwu. If I had my druthers, I would have it much more equal. 35% Madison, 30% Chandler, 25 McBride, 10 Nwangwu, and I'm sticking to it. And I hope Chandler ends up winning the job.
Do we think they do this by drive? Like, okay, this is a Madison drive, this is a Chandler drive, and so on? Or do we think we do this by like certain plays? Like, okay, this one when we have a running back in pass protection, so it's Chandler or whatever.
I think it's by situation. I also want to emphasize that like it's probably the case that Madison is obviously better than these other backs. I just like want to put that out there. Like, yeah, we're doing these splits based.
Which is why we're all penciling him in the highest.
Right, but it's like 35. I don't know, man. I think he's going to get more than that. Like it's
what I want. It's not. This is not real life. This is what I want.
I think that it would be better for him to get more than that because he's better at being a running back.
But he's not that effective, though. Like I believe that he knows the plays, and I believe that he can pass protect. But what about his profile statistically? Like makes you want him on the field so much?
That he doesn't create negative plays.
Okay, that's fair.
That's like the number 1 skill I'm looking for in a running back.
Okay, so you're cool with in his last 208 attempts, he's 3.7
Because they used him
yards
on the
per
goal line. Like I just like that. I'm not gonna like knock him for being the 3rd-and-1 runner, right? Like
I think there's
so you're good.
a
You're good with
practical
the
way to.
efficiency of a Leroy Horde, like who's gonna get. I shouldn't even slander Leroy Horde like that because he could like bust big runs, but I just don't think Madison gives you any explosive capability.
yeah, if we're deciding between Madison and an equally like good back that can also split off 40-yard runs, yeah, of course I want the other one, right? But like my concern is that I don't know that players like Ty Chandler and Kenny Nwangwu can avoid -7-yard runs. Like that's my issue, right?
Will they get greedy and run
seems a
around
little
or get
hyperbolic.
smoked in the backfield?
Right, yeah. Like they
Like what leads to a 7-yard loss in a run play? Like what skill
Right.
is that?
It's
And
an inability to.
Madison plays it more
Dalvin
responsibly.
Cook
and I think
Yes.
could not avoid negative plays last year. Like
because he was greedy.
Yeah, specifically last year. But yeah.
Yeah.
Which is why a bunch of this we talked about this phenomenon, right? Before camp, a bunch of people wanted Madison cut because he was so bad. And then during the season, they were like, Madison should get more carries because Dalvin Cook is so bad. Right. Like I feel like we're missing a lesson here, which is that we're overemphasizing the capability to produce big plays from the running back position at the cost of negative plays. And my concern is that somebody like a Ty Chandler, and I'd love to be wrong, obviously, right? Somebody like a Ty Chandler and someone like a Kenny Nwangwu, they'll get you a 20-yard run if you give them enough carries. But what happens between their 20 and 40-yard runs is a bunch of negative plays that net hurts you. So the ceiling for these guys is extraordinary, right? Like all of these people have like remarkable ceilings. My concern is not only that they won't hit it, it's that we're so focused on what Madison's ceiling is that we never talk about his floor, and his floor is way more valuable than a lot of these backs. So like I didn't give him 50% of carries. Remember, I gave him 48. But I think that there's a difference between, 35 and 48, right? I think that there's like it just feels like de-emphasizing Madison. I think we're focusing on the wrong things with running backs.
that was an impassioned argument. I refuse to agree with you. I'm just rapidly trying to stat head Madison's negative plays, and it's just not working for me. The stat head filters are betraying me. So have to my my rebuttal will have to wait another day until I can get that figured
I
out.
can, I guess, explain why I think this is happening, which is, I think under the like Kubiaks when Madison was playing, I think they really had him trying to be relief Dalvin Cook, and he would kind of read plays out the same way Dalvin Cook does. Like Dalvin Cook will see somebody in an A gap and he'll just bounce that thing out to the edge because he can get the edge even if the linebacker has an angle on him or something. But Madison doesn't have that same explosiveness, and he doesn't have that same ability that Dalvin Cook does, but he would read it out the same way. So he would bounce something out and then he would, get tackled for more of a loss. And it would be like, what are you doing, man? Last year, I think Madison really played more of his own game where he would see, all right, yeah, there's a little bit of space. I can fall forward for 4 yards. I could try to bounce this out and make something more of it, or I can just kind of take what's in front of me. He got better at taking what was in front of him. So I really think Alexander, and I was one of the people calling for him to, or at least predicting that he would get cut in camp. And I think he took a genuine step forward last year to become somebody that will do a little bit better of taking what's in front of him, using his physicality. He's a big thumper. Get a hit, roll over somebody, get tackled forward and turn it into a 6-yard run rather than trying to bounce everything out, be super greedy. I don't mind being a greedy running back, but you kind of have to be able to cash the check. And I think he did a good job of understanding that floor. I think that does make him a good kind of default half the carries kind of running back that will keep your game on schedule, or at least close to on schedule, rather than running around going crazy, taking big losses.
Yeah, I think that Madison's going to be polarizing. I think that the way they use running backs will be polarizing this year, and we'll see what happens with Dalvin Cook, obviously, but I'm still not expecting him to be part of the group. That's good, guys. We'll talk to you again on Thursday. As for the rest of the week, Luke Inman back tomorrow. We'll keep rehashing the draft. Reggie Wilson on Wednesday. Thanks to our everydayers for watching us throughout the week on the Minnesota Football Party and all of our programming on Locked On Sports Minnesota. Comment below. What do you think about Alexander Mattison as a featured back this year on the Minnesota Vikings? He's Arif Hasan, Pro Football Network, at Arif Hasan NFL. Luke Braun, Locked On Vikings host, daily Vikings content with him, at Luke Braun NFL on Twitter. And I'm Sam Ekstrom, at Sam Ekstrom. Thanks so much for watching. Talk to you next time on the Minnesota Football Party.